welcome to the Friday film. This is the very last in our woke films. So if that sort of thing makes you annoyed, you'll be relieved, although I'm surprised you're still watching. If you are still watching. If you're not watching, you won't see this. And other obvious statements. Anyway, here's some of the things that came out for me over the weeks we've been discussing it. I'm just looking at my notes over here. Firstly, I'm glad it's over. It's quite tiring talking about this stuff because we have had some hostility directed at us. Not much, but some people got annoyed with us or upset. And you're thinking, I just wanted to talk about it. But people get and that's upsetting. We don't want to upset people. So I'm glad it's over. But then I reflected on that. And partly a lot of this came out when we were discussing race. And I was thinking, well, I'm glad it's over. I can walk away from it now. But if I'm the subject of racism, which I'm not, incidentally, if I were, I can't just walk away from it. Which kind of got me thinking onto the idea of actually, if you are in this country, if you are white, now I know there's a group of people that say, well, the white people in the minority and we're being picked on. I don't think we are. I think our society is still set up for white people. And that's not saying white people are bad. I'm just saying that's how it is. It's like saying, well, the sky is blue, you know, the world operates on oxygen, all this kind of stuff. It's not a judgment statement. I'm not having a go at anyone. What I'm saying is, in our society, if you're white, if you're male, if you're straight, you certainly hold more cards than a lot of other people, because that's seen very often as the norm. And this is where it gets interesting, because people like me don't notice a lot of this stuff. We were talking in one of the groups, one of the sessions, about men in particular. And I'm not having a go at men. This is what we're used to. This is how we live. And everyone works to their best advantage. In our office, often you'll get, and I've only noticed men do this, particularly if there's a woman working in the office, because two of our managers are women. A man will come in and they'll stand in the doorway like this. I'm trying to frame myself. And leading up to the frame, they'll take up the whole door, and then they will talk down, literally down, to the woman who's sitting in the chair, who's trying to do her job. And I've noticed how that's quite a dominant thing. And I'm not having a go at anyone. I'm just saying this is how it is. We're trained to control a room, aren't we? We're trained, how do you manage these people? How do you make sure you've got everyone's attention? And these aren't necessarily bad things, but it's about being aware of these things. There's another word, manspreading and mansplaining. And on one level, that's funny, but actually on another level, it's because men are brought up to think, well, you're in charge, and you know what's going on, and you get what you want, and you take what you want. And to an extent, some of those things can be helpful. But not just for men, for all of us. We should all be a bit more assertive, perhaps, about what we want and about what we want to do and getting things done. But men have the advantage culturally. And that's true of men. I think whatever your skin colour, men have the edge generally, because we do live in societies. Not all of them, but most societies are set up where men kind of are in charge. And you go, well, why wife? And no, you like, oh. The reality is that, isn't it? Why do you think when Elizabeth II was queen, her husband wasn't called king? Because king is senior. And now we have a king, his partner, his wife, is allowed to be called a queen, because we all know the queen's not as senior. And when it doesn't happen as much now, but often when people walk into an office, if I'm sitting in there and one of the managers is sitting there, people talk to me. People who don't know us, people who know us don't talk to me. So there's a kind of default And it is improving. When people talk about managers or doctors, they go, well, what does he say? And they go, well, it was a she actually. And this isn't about any feminist agenda necessarily. This is about culture. We expect things. And when they're different, some people react to go, well, we're under threat now. We're not. We're just trying to level the playing field a bit more. Anyway, so that's been very interesting. And all this comes together, right? This is where it gets interesting. In a big word that has come up called intersectionality. Intersectionality, where it says in society there's some bits where you have an advantage and some where you don't. So being white in our part of the world is an advantage. Living in Chelmsford Wood is not an advantage. Yeah? Being a man gives you a slight edge. Being a woman, often people will assume you're not senior. I'm trying to think of other issues. Being straight, people will just carry on as usual. When you say, you say about my partner, and they go, oh, well, what's her name? And you go, well, his name. They go, oh. There's a little reaction, isn't there? Because you're not normal. So intersectionality is where all these ticks and crosses go along, and some people are more disadvantaged than others. Like if you have a disability, if you turn up somewhere using a wheelchair, you find there's steps. You find, you go to a concert and it's on the first floor and it's in an old building, there's no lift. Or there is a lift, but it takes you 5 or 10 minutes to get to the first floor because, we're not set up, it's not designed for that. So it's another little cross. And no one's getting at anyone particularly. No one's deliberately out to give anyone a hard time. But all these little bits add up. And intersectionality says, well, the more of those disadvantages you've got, the worse off you'll be. So if you haven't got much money, if you're in a job that's regarded as low grade or unemployed, if you haven't had a great education, if you live in a particular part of town, if your skin is a certain colour, if your gender is a certain type, if your sexuality or sexual orientation is a certain... There's all these things. And some people are, well, you're just being woke, everyone's equal. They're clearly not. The fact that there was an advert at the moment with Father Christmas, it's this time of year, and his wife is portrayed as black, and everyone's going, well, what's all that about? Well, what is it all about? And they go, well, it's just making a point. Why is it making a point? There's no point to be made. Why can't Father Christmas's wife, presumably Mrs. Christmas, why can't she be black? And with the Time Lord, when Doctor Who became a woman, everyone's, well, a Time Lord can't be a woman. Well, there's no such thing as a Time Lord. A Time Lord could be whatever the writers want. Oh, they're trying to make a point. What point is trying to be made here? It's a story. If it moves the story on, why not? And why not include people? And one of the things that I've picked up is in conversation is people when you see stories, and the visual is important, the optics are important. When you see stories, you see people that are you, don't you? And I remember growing up with cartoons, and all the characters were white. And someone was talking about this, and if you're black, you think, well, none of them are me. I'm not in this story. If you have the older Bibles, some of them still like it, with pictures in it, and Jesus is white and the disciple, everyone's white. You just think, oh, this is a story that isn't about me. And there's a case to be made. Well, I think you should have the Bible, it pictures the right colour of the people from that part of the world. But there's a case to be made for how do we make it so it includes people. Being inclusive is what it's about. But the more things that aren't there, the more we say, well, this is the normal, and the word is normative. If we assume normal is white, English speaking, male, middle class. If we say, well, that's the norm, everything else is different. It's a bit like the word exotic. These exotic nations. Why is someone from, some country in Africa exotic? and someone from Birmingham isn't. It doesn't make any sense, does it? People are people and we're different. What people are trying to say is that I'm not used to that. Well, that's okay. Get used to it. So it's fascinating how we treat people. And again, this isn't, no one's having to go at anyone at this point. So if you're feeling a rage on inside, don't. It's okay. It's trying to understand how we view the world. And this is what Simon talked about a lot when Simon J was with us, about learning to see the world through different eyes. And we do this every Sunday when we try and understand what the Bible is saying, when we try and interpret what Jesus wants us to be like and to do. We're trying to see the world through different eyes. We try and see it through the eyes of Jesus. And the eyes of Jesus are, or the story of Jesus is told from an ancient Middle Eastern perspective. So we try and understand that. We've layered so much of our culture on top, it's very hard to step away from it. So one of the things then is to be aware. What am I expecting? Why am I surprised when, oh, this person's like that and they're not? What did I expect them to be like? So trying to explore and be prepared for the diversity, for people that aren't me. So that's one thing. Another thing that's come up is something called tone policing. Tone policing. This is where people say, well, I will listen to you, but you've got to say it in a way I understand, and a way that doesn't upset me. So if people are angry, you say, well, if you calm down, then I'll listen to you. Well, maybe they have good reason to be angry. And tone policing is often used on women. You know, they're hysterical. The very word hysterical is a gender-orientated word. Hysterical is based on the word around the uterus. So only women are hysterical because they get so emotional about everything. So it's actually saying, if you weren't so hysterical, if you were like me, a calm, logical male, then I would listen to you. So tone policing says, you change your tone and then I'll listen to you. So it's about a power dynamic. I'm in charge, and when you behave yourself, then I might give you a chance. The playing field is not level, is it? And that's not just men take that attitude. Women use that, take that as well. Particularly white people will use that. If someone who isn't white dares be angry about the injustices they see around them, well, if you weren't so angry, perhaps we could do something about it. That's not how it works. Perhaps we should say, oh, maybe they've got a point. And we'll try and work it out from there. So tone policing, intersectionality, tone policing. Another thing is the eye rolling that we see. And there was a bit of that when we just introduced the theme. The eye rolling, here we go. Like it's a big effort. It's not a big effort to show people compassion and care. It's not a big effort to change our language. If someone finds a particular phrase difficult or offensive or upsetting, just change the phrase. We don't need to drive home. You don't like the word gay? Well, I use the word gay, then I want to use gay. I can use gay if I want to use the word gay. Well, people use the word, kids do it all the time, using the word gay as an insult. Well, why you find a different word? Well, I'm not going to. It never used to mean that when I was young. Well, it does now. The world changes. I never used to have a mobile phone, but I use one now. I never used to use the word mobile phone, but I use it now. It costs nothing to be gracious and understanding. And if someone wants to be called he, she, they, or them, who cares? Why do we have the eye rolling? Just call them it. It costs nothing, does it? It costs you nothing. Which does bring us on to this point where people are very upset about things that have nothing to do with them. So if someone is trans, for instance, why do I have to have very strong opinions on them? It's none of my business. It doesn't affect me. let them live their life. They don't have to live their life the way I want them to, or the way I live my life. Why can't we let people live their lives? Now, I know there's an argument here again for a more complex and the impact it has and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, the bottom line, why are we trying to tell people how to live their lives? You could say the church does that all the time. Well, perhaps the church shouldn't be telling people how to live their lives. Perhaps the church should be saying, this is what Jesus is like. We're going to try and be like that. Yeah. So, I think I've been through a lot of the things. Yeah, one of the interesting concepts was around we called it decolonizing, where it's about how do we change the way we think? How do we take out all these years of attitudes and assumptions and see the world through different eyes? And I think for me that was probably my biggest challenge, was to start to see the world how others people see it, and particularly how to see the world from the eyes of those who don't necessarily hold all the power. And for some people that will be a threat. And I've had to learn, as a white middle class educated male, sometimes just to shut up. And as you can imagine, that's really hard for me. And I'm not very good at it. But shut up. Who cares? Does it matter? Do you have to say that? Do you have to have an opinion? Do you have to tell everyone what you think? Do you have to muscle in and try and manage stuff? So it's not about patronizingly saying, well, of course, we'll let everyone else have a go now. It's actually about stepping back and saying, I need to reduce. I need to be slightly less. I don't have to be in power and in charge all the time, because all of these things, all of these areas boil down to power. Who has power? And there are people in the world that will use that to make us be hostile to one another, particularly those people who are nearer the bottom of the heap. So who do we see protesting about immigration? I know Farage does, but it's usually they mobilise people who are poorer, people in lower paid jobs. And they go, you haven't got a job because of that immigrant. You haven't got anywhere to live because of them. There's trouble over there in your area because of those people who've got that colour skin. You're under threat because that person's trans. It doesn't make any sense. Because you look at where's all our money going? Where's all your money going? Where's it going? Large companies, into a lot of powerful individuals, as some very famous billionaires knocking around, aren't there? The energy is a prime example of that. The energy companies continue to make literally millions and millions of pounds profit, while they continue to increase the prices, and then we say it's someone else's fault. We don't say, well, hang on a minute, energy companies, why don't you reduce your prices, and then the cost of living won't be such an issue. Housing, this is controversial, but the government, several governments, and none have changed their mind, started selling off social housing, and then all of a sudden it's someone else's fault. There's nowhere where I can live. There's no social housing left. And what do they often do with social housing? It's bought up by landlords, by businesses, who then rent it at a high rent that costs more than getting a mortgage. But whose fault is it there's no housing? Well, immigrants, innit? You see? And there's a lot of misinformation. I'm not going to get into conversation. If anyone messages me about immigrants on this, I'm not going to respond to you. Because there is so much misinformation about who gets what, and they've got all that stuff. They got a mobile phone and they get a house, and most of which isn't actually true, or is certainly an interpretation of the facts. When we should be looking elsewhere for the source of our problems. So waking up is about knowing what the facts are And also, I would say you won't get the facts very often off YouTube, off dodgy websites, or off websites that are angry and telling you who you're meant to hate. I think that's probably it. It's a bit of going on a bit, really, haven't I? It's 24 minutes. I think we'll close it there. I think to bring something out of all this, all the woke stuff, people do feel threatened. And my response would be, don't be threatened. No one is a threat to you, particularly people who are worse off than you. No one is a threat in that sense. No one's going to take over. We do need to stand for justice. And one of the things Jesus shows us is stand particularly for those who are in a weaker position than you, who don't have the power you have. Stand with them. That's the side I want to be found on when Jesus comes back. I don't want him to find me in some manor house drinking champagne. I mean, I'd like to be in a manor house drinking champagne, but I'd rather Jesus found me here than with the rich and the privileged. Because where did you find Jesus? Amongst the poor and the ordinary people. And secondly, I would say, don't be annoyed about stuff. Be curious. Enjoy it. Be interested. Why does he or she think like that? Why do they have that kind of lifestyle? What's going on? How do they end up thinking they were this? When actually, I've never seen anything like it before. And ask questions. Explore. People don't mind being asked about themselves. In fact, they quite like it. So what's your story? What's it like? How do people treat you? It's like discovering a new wing of the family, isn't it? People from other countries, people with other outlooks to us, people with other lifestyles to us, all these different things. We're discovering new wings of God's family, and it's actually a joy. It's not a threat, and it's not a problem. And I think for us, if you're watching this and you're like me and you're white, the temptation is to go, well, actually, we're being squeezed out. We're actually being included in a big global story of lots of cultures and lots of colours and lots of stories. And we're actually we're coming out of our fortress and saying, you must be like us. And we're saying, let's join this massive, diverse world. And actually, if you're British, that's our story anyway. Right from the prehistory, people have always come to this country. One of the reasons this country is so great is because of its diversity. And people go, well, I'm a Saxon. Saxons are from Germany. No, I'm an Anglo-Saxon. I can't remember where the Angles are from. They're from somewhere else as well. You know. And that's way back. There's been waves of people coming in over all the centuries. Who knows who any of us are? But I know one thing that we are. All of us, whatever our colour, whatever our gender, or whatever our sexuality, whatever our religion. I know what we are. We are God's children. And that is the most beautiful thing of all. Imagine being part of that family. Imagine sitting around the table with all of God's children. Fantastic. Be woke if you want, but delight in the diversity of God's creation and look after it and look after everyone.